I remember the exact moment my first life ended. It wasn't when I took my last breath in that sterile, lonely hospital room at 68. It was years before in a small-town courthouse when my husband Vincent looked at me with those sorrowful, beautiful hazel eyes and said, "Sweetheart, I love you too much to let you waste your life on me." He was holding a set of divorce papers. He'd been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive cancer, he said. Months to live. He couldn't bear the thought of me watching him wither away. He wanted me to be free, to find happiness after he was gone. I was 22 and I believed him. Tears streamed down my face, not of grief for our ending, but of awe for his profound, selfless love. I signed the papers, my hand shaking with emotion. I truly thought I would never meet a man better than Vincent Miller. Even after the divorce, despite the whispers in our small Ohio town, poor Clara, abandoned when things got hard, I stayed. I moved out of our little apartment and into his parents' aging farmhouse on the outskirts of town. I told everyone and myself that I was honoring Vincent's last wish, to care for his family since he could not. His father, Frank, had a bad back. His mother, Eleanor, had weak nerves. His younger sister, Jessica, was a teenager with big college dreams and a sense of entitlement even bigger. I became their rock. I took a job as a seamstress and later a waitress at the local diner. Every dollar was stretched thin: groceries for the Millers, medicine for Frank, a new dress for Jessica's homecoming, saving for her tuition. I wore thrift store clothes and ate the leftovers no one else wanted. For 35 years I was the dutiful daughter-in-law, the faithful widow. I refused dates, turned away any hint of romance. My life was a monument to Vincent's memory. I was sustained by the bittersweet belief that I had been loved so perfectly once. The day I died, it was raining. The hospital window blurred the gray world outside. There was no one holding my hand. Frank and Eleanor were long gone, God rest them. Jessica, the lawyer she'd become, was somewhere in New York. I was alone, my body worn out from decades of labor and cheap food. And then, as if the universe needed to deliver one final crushing punch before the lights went out, the door to my room opened. It was Jessica. But not the gawky girl I'd helped raise. This was a sharp-faced woman in a designer pantsuit. And beside her was Vincent. Not the ghost of my 22-year-old husband. A man in his late 50s, tanned and fit, with silver at his temples and the same hazel eyes. He held the arm of an elegant woman with a familiar face, Lily Dawson, his high school sweetheart who'd moved away after graduation. And behind them, two young adults who had Vincent's smile. My dying heart gave a pathetic, confused flutter. "Clara," Vincent said, his voice different, smoother but unmistakable. There was no pity in his eyes. Only a faint, uncomfortable distaste for the shriveled old woman in the bed. Lily stepped forward, a gentle smile on her lips that didn't reach her cold eyes. "Claire dear, we thought you should know the truth before you go. Vincent never had cancer. He just couldn't marry you and leave his parents in a lurch. He needed someone reliable to take care of things while he built a life for us." She spoke softly, like she was sharing a secret. "All that dowry money your family gave you, the savings bonds, your grandmother's jewelry he said you'd lost, it gave us our start in California. Real estate. It's done very well." She touched the simple, exquisite pearl necklace at her throat. "My grandmother's pearls." Vincent finally found his voice, looking at his shoes. "The life insurance policy my death paid out. Bought our first house. Mom and Dad, Jess. They knew. They were so grateful to you, Clara." Jessica sniffed, looking at her manicure. "You were always so good at taking care of things. It's what you were for." He monitor beside me picked up the shift in my heartbeat. Not from illness but from a rage so pure it was incandescent. They'd known. All of them. They'd watched me work myself into an early grave, living on scraps of affection and lies, while they lived full, rich lives funded by my love, my labor, my inheritance. Vincent looked at the spiking monitor, then back at my face. For a second I saw the young man who'd pretended to adore me. "I did love you in a way," he murmured as if offering a consolation prize. Lily's smile turned sweetly vicious. "He just loved me more." The world simply faded to silence as everything went still around me, and the first sound of my second life was a voice. "Clara honey. You ready?" I blinked. Sunlight. Not the sterile hospital light but warm, dusty courthouse sunlight. I was standing on the steps of the Shelby County Courthouse. Vincent, young, heartbreakingly handsome with that perfectly practiced look of tragic devotion, was holding my hands. The divorce papers were folded in his coat pocket. This was the moment. The exact moment after I'd signed them, when he was delivering his parting soliloquy. In my previous life I had thrown my arms around him, sobbing that I would wait for him forever. Now I felt the weight of decades of memory settle into my 22-year-old bones. The exhaustion, the hunger, the humiliation, the icy loneliness of that deathbed. I looked at his beloved face and saw the stranger who had condemned me to a life of servitude. "Clara," he prompted, concern knitting his brow. "I know this is hard. But it's for the best. You have to walk away and never look back. Promise me." I took a deep, shuddering breath. The air smelled of cut grass and diesel from a passing bus. It smelled like freedom. I pulled my hands from his. My voice, when it came, was calm, eerily steady. "Don't worry, Vincent," I said. "I won't look back." The confusion that flickered in his eyes was the first truly genuine emotion I'd seen from him in 2 lifetimes. I turned, my heels clicking on the stone steps, and walked away without a single tear. I had a dowry to reclaim and a life to steal back. I went straight to the little house we'd rented, a shabby but sweet place I'd poured my heart into. Vincent, in his performance of a dying man, had moved back to his parents' farm for care. All his things were already gone. Only my possessions remained, along with the items my parents had given us to start our life. The good china from my mother, the pristine Electrolux vacuum, the Singer sewing machine, the pair of sturdy wool blankets, my grandmother's oak hope chest. In my first life I'd left almost all of it. A tribute to my grief, a practical necessity for the Millers who had so little. Now I saw it for what it was, my capital. I worked with a methodical fury. I packed the china in newspapers. I folded the blankets. I emptied my closet of every dress, every pair of shoes. I took the canned goods from the pantry, the pots and pans from the kitchen. From under our bed I pulled out the small locked metal box. Inside, wrapped in velvet, were the last tangible pieces of my dowry, 10 gold bars, each the size of a chocolate block. My father, a pragmatic man who distrusted banks and Vincent in equal measure, had given them to me on my wedding day. "For a true emergency, Clara girl," he'd said. In my first life, the emergency had been Vincent's fake funeral, paid for with 3 of these bars. The rest had slowly bled away to house repairs and Jessica's tuition. I hefted one. It was heavy, cold, real. I thought of Lily's pearl necklace. A plan, cold and sharp, formed in my mind. I carried the box to the backyard shed. In a corner, under a sack of peat moss, was my grandfather's old toolbox. During the war he'd been a machinist and a bit of a rogue. At the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, were 10 blocks of brass he'd plated with a microscopically thin layer of real gold. "For fooling greedy people who don't look too close," he chuckled once. They were perfect counterfeits, identical in weight and shine. My hands didn't shake as I made the swap, placing the real gold into the oilcloth and the fakes into the velvet lining of my box. I carried the real box back inside and hid it in the false bottom of my hope chest, a secret compartment my grandfather had also built. Then I called my father from the neighbor's phone. "Dad. It's Clara. I've left Vincent. I need you to come get me and everything I own. Right now." The silence on the line was profound. Then a whoop of joy that nearly cracked the receiver. "Thank God. I'll be there with your brothers in 20 minutes. True to his word, my father, Robert, arrived in his Ford pickup with my older brothers Mark and David in a second truck. Their faces were etched with worry that melted into relief when they saw my determined expression, not the shattered mess they'd expected. "He showed his true colors, huh?" Mark grunted, already lifting the hope chest as if it weighed nothing. "Something like that," I said. We loaded every single item I owned into the trucks. When we drove away, the rented house was as bare as the day we'd moved in. Cracking plaster, a dripping tap, and nothing else. Let Vincent's parents explain that to the landlord. We arrived at my childhood home just as the sunset was painting the sky orange. My mother, Susan, rushed out, pulling me into a hug so tight it squeezed the breath from my lungs. "Hi, girl," she whispered, her voice thick. "You're home." That evening, as we unloaded, I told them a simplified version. Vincent had wanted out, had used a pathetic excuse, and I was done. I didn't mention the gold, the fakes, or the decades-long betrayal I remembered. That truth was too monstrous even for them. "Good riddance," my father said, slamming the tailgate shut. Never liked his shifty eyes. It was past midnight when the headlights cut through our dark driveway. Car doors slammed, followed by furious voices. Frank Miller's gruff shout echoed in the quiet night. "Clara, you get out here. What is the meaning of this?" The whole Miller family was on our lawn. Frank, red-faced, Eleanor clutching her sweater like a Victorian heroine, and Jessica glaring with teenage indignation. Neighbors' porch lights started flicking on. "You cleaned out your house." Frank bellowed as my family and I stepped onto the porch. "Our house. You took the sewing machine, the vacuum, the blankets. Those belong to the Miller family now. You bring them back, girl." My mother stepped forward, a petite woman who suddenly seemed 10 feet tall. "Frank Miller, you worthless old goat. That sewing machine was a wedding gift from my sister. The vacuum came from Clara's earnings. The blankets were hers before she ever knew your son's name. You didn't own a decent spoon before my daughter married into your family. Now you get off my property before I have my sons show you the way." The gathered neighbors, who knew the Millers' laziness and my years of quiet toil, began to murmur in agreement. Someone laughed. Eleanor switched tactics, her voice a wounded warble. "Clara, how could you? After all we've been through? Vincent is devastated." I looked at her, this woman I'd nursed through countless spells, for whom I'd cooked 1,000 meals. I thought of her in my hospital room, knowing the truth and saying nothing. "Vincent," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the night, "will have to manage his own devastation. We are divorced. You are no longer my family. Good night." I turned and walked back inside, leaving them sputtering on the lawn, exposed under the harsh glare of the porch light and public opinion. The first battle was over. I had won. But the war, I knew, was just beginning. The next week was a flurry of quiet activity. I settled back into my old room, the familiarity a comfort and a cage. I needed to move forward, not backward. My memories were a roadmap of future opportunities and pitfalls. Vincent, true to form, came skulking around a few days later. He found me in the backyard hanging laundry. He looked paler, leaning on the fence post with a rehearsed fragility. "Clara," he began, his voice a masterpiece of strained emotion. "I heard what happened with Mom and Dad. I'm so sorry. They're just lost without you." I kept pinning sheets to the line, saying nothing. I was hoping," he continued, a tremor in his voice, "for a keepsake. Something to remember us by. Maybe that little metal box you kept under the bed? It's not about the money, it's just. It was ours." It's always about the money, I thought. In my first life, this moment had come later, after his death, when a weeping Jessica had asked for something of his, and I'd given her the box, not knowing the gold inside was her brother's severance pay for abandoning me. I turned to him, a bland smile on my face. "Of course, Vincent. A keepsake." I walked inside and returned with the box, now heavy with its brass imposters. I handed it to him. "For all the beautiful memories." His fingers closed around the handle greedily, the weight clearly pleasing him. The confusion and panic he'd shown at the courthouse were gone, replaced by the smug certainty of a man who'd gotten exactly what he wanted. He didn't even open it. He just thanked me, his eyes already looking past me toward the future this box would buy him and Lily. "Don't look back, Clara," he said, his parting line delivered with finality. "I won't," I promised again, and this time I meant it. With Vincent gone, likely to run straight to Lily to plan their escape, I could focus. I called a family meeting in our living room. My parents, Mark and David, and their wives. "I need to change my life," I told them. "And I want to help change ours." I laid out a simple, powerful idea. The city 30 miles away was growing. A new highway was being planned. I knew, because I'd read about it in a future newspaper in a past life, that a vast tract of scrubland on the southern edge was going to be bought for a new hospital and university complex within 5 years. Right now it was dirt-cheap farmland owned by folks eager to sell. "I want to use my dowry to buy some of that land," I said. My father frowned. "Land? Out there? It's worthless, Clara girl." "It won't be," I said with a conviction that made them all pause. "And that's just the start." I looked at my brother David's wife, Anna, a phenomenal cook who'd been laid off from the school cafeteria. "Anna, what if we opened a restaurant? A real one. You run the kitchen. I'll handle the business. We split the profit." Anna's eyes widened. "A restaurant? But the money is my problem, I said. I turned to Mark, a natural hustler who knew everyone and everything. And Mark, you know all the factories, the scrap yards. What if we started a recycling business? Not just scrap metal, but finding value in what others throw away. The room was silent, filled with the weight of the unknown. It's a big risk, my father said slowly. Staying here doing nothing is a bigger one, I replied, thinking of my deathbed. I have a feeling. A strong one. My family, though skeptical, loved me. They saw a fire in me they'd never seen before, not even grief. It was determination. Within a month, using 1 gold bar converted to cash, we put a down payment on 20 acres of that worthless scrubland. The paperwork was dizzying, but I signed my new name, Clara Wilson, my maiden name, with a steady hand. Simultaneously, I found a small, shuttered diner for rent near a growing factory district. With another portion of the gold, I bought the lease and the equipment. Anna's Kitchen was born. Her meatloaf and peach cobbler became legend before we even hung the sign. The scrap business was harder, grittier. But Mark had the touch. He began brokering deals for paper, cardboard, and metal. I used my knowledge of future trends to steer him towards specific materials, certain types of plastics, specific alloys, that were about to become valuable. One afternoon, while I was painting the trim at the diner, a shadow fell across the doorway. It was Jessica Miller. She looked older than her 17 years, her face pinched with resentment. You ruined everything, she hissed. I set down my paintbrush. Did I? We had to sell the tractor. The house is falling apart without you fixing things. She couldn't even say the word money. Vincent's gone. He left us a stupid box of metal paperweights and vanished. Mom says it's your fault for driving him away. So Vincent had taken the fake gold and run. He'd either discovered the deception or, more likely, had tried to cash them and been laughed out of a pawn shop. He'd cut his losses and fled, leaving his family to drown. The poetic justice of it warmed me more than the afternoon sun. Your brother made his choices, Jessica, I said calmly. Just like you can make yours. You're smart. Focus on school. Get a scholarship. Get out. She stared at me, hatred and something like desperate confusion in her eyes. You're cruel. No, I said, picking up my brush again. I'm free. And you should want to be too. She stormed off, but the seed was planted. The perfect, comfortable system they'd built around my labor had collapsed. Now their unity began to fall apart over time. And I had a business to run, a fortune to build, and a new life to live. The past was a country I had no intention of visiting again. 5 years passed in a whirlwind of work and quiet triumph. Anna's Kitchen was a roaring success. We expanded, opening a second, fancier location downtown called the Oak Room, where Anna's culinary genius truly shone. My land investment became the talk of the family and the town, when the city announced the purchase of the entire southern tract for the new Mercy General Hospital. Our 20 acres were suddenly worth 50 times what we paid. We sold half, reinvesting the profits, and kept the rest, its value climbing by the day. Wilson Recycling, run by Mark, grew into a small empire. We were no longer just scrappers. We were brokers, consultants, pioneers in a field most people still saw as dirty work. I used my knowledge to avoid the pitfalls I remembered from my first life: bad partnerships, market gluts. I was Clara Wilson, business owner. The whispers about poor, abandoned Clara had died long ago, replaced by respect, curiosity, and a touch of envy. I wore smart skirts and kept my hair styled. I had an accountant and a lawyer. I'd even bought my parents a new house. The Millers, by contrast, had spiraled. News trickled back through the small-town grapevine. Frank's back pain had miraculously worsened with no one to fetch his pills. Eleanor's nerves had become a permanent state of bitter complaint. They'd lost the farm to debt and moved into a dilapidated rental in town. Jessica was the wild card. She'd taken my advice in the most twisted way possible. She'd gotten a scholarship to a state college, fueled entirely by a bitter, grinding anger. She blamed me for her family's downfall, for Vincent's abandonment, for her own lost comfort. She visited sometimes, a silent, glaring presence on my parents' porch, demanding to know if I felt guilty. I never let her in. Then one crisp autumn day Vincent returned. He didn't come to my door. He went to the old Miller rental. I heard about it from Mark, who'd heard it from a supplier who lived on their street. He showed up looking like hell, Mark reported over dinner at my new apartment. Thin, ragged. No fancy California tan. Had Lily and 2 sullen kids in tow. Story is the business ventures out west failed. Lost everything. Came crawling back to Mom and Dad thinking they'd still have the farm. I bet that was a happy reunion, I said dryly. Like a hornet's nest in a phone booth, Mark grinned. Turns out little sister Jessica is the one running the show now. And she was not happy to see Big Brother, especially when he admitted the gold bricks he took were fakes. Apparently he thought you'd scammed him. I allowed myself a small cold smile. The counterfeit gold had done its work perfectly, creating a rift of paranoia and betrayal that had clearly festered for years. The inevitable explosion happened at the town 4th of July picnic the following summer. I was there with my family enjoying the fireworks. The Millers were a huddled, miserable-looking group on a distant blanket. As the final volley of fireworks boomed overhead, a fight broke out. It was Vincent and Jessica, their shouts carrying over the dying cracks and pops. You drove her away. You greedy little, Vincent's voice slurred. Me. You took the only thing of value and ran. You left us with nothing. You're a fraud and a coward. Jessica shrieked. It culminated in a shocking, brutal moment under the streetlights. Jessica, with a strength born of pure rage, shoved Vincent hard. He stumbled back over a picnic cooler and fell hard to the ground. The crowd gasped. Lily screamed. Frank and Eleanor just stood there, frozen, as if watching a play they'd seen before but never understood. Vincent wasn't killed, but he was badly hurt. A concussion, a broken arm. People rushed to help and authorities soon arrived. Jessica was taken in for questioning. The spectacle was complete. The perfect, secretive Miller family was now the town's most public train wreck. In the aftermath, Jessica, released on bail, came to see me. She stood on my doorstep, the anger gone, replaced by a hollow, weary despair. You knew, she said, her voice flat. You knew what he was. What we all were. I didn't deny it. I just waited. He told me when he was drunk after the fight. About faking the cancer. About Lily. About using you. She looked at her hands. I knew some of it. Not all. I was a kid and I liked the things you bought me. The confession hung in the air, ugly and bare. What do you want from me, Jessica? I asked, not unkindly but with firm distance. Nothing, she whispered. I just wanted you to know. That I know. She turned and walked away, a ghost of the entitled girl she'd been. I watched her go. There was no victory in it, only a sad, quiet finality. People who once controlled my life were facing the consequences of their choices. Vincent was a broken man, living in a resentful household. His parents were shells. Jessica was legally and spiritually adrift. Lily was trapped in a nightmare of her own making. I closed my door and locked it. I looked around my clean, quiet, well-appointed apartment, bought and paid for by my own mind and labor. The sounds of the town's gossip and the Millers' drama were locked outside. In here there was only peace and the gentle, powerful hum of a future I was building for myself, one wise decision at a time. The past was finally behind me for good. Another decade unfurled, marked not by vengeance but by creation. By the time I turned 40, Clara Wilson was a name spoken with respect in regional business circles. Wilson Recycling was a leader in sustainable materials. The Oak Room had won awards. The remaining 10 acres of land now held a small, successful office park I'd developed. My personal life was full, but not in the way my younger self might have imagined. I never married again. The well of romance in me had been poisoned and then paved over with concrete. But I wasn't lonely. My family was my bedrock. My nieces and nephews called me Auntie Sue, and I spoiled them rotten. The Millers faded into a sad local footnote. Vincent, after his injury, he struggled with his health for a long time. He and Lily lived in a state of perpetual, quiet desperation, their children estranged. Frank died of a stroke. Eleanor passed some time later, after years of stress and worry. Jessica, to her credit, served probation, finished her degree in social work and moved to another state. We never spoke again. It was better that way. The final piece of my old life was addressed on a bright Tuesday morning. I stood in the living room of my parents' home, the home I'd bought them, surrounded by my brothers and their families. In the center of the room was my grandmother's hope chest. I knelt and triggered the hidden catch. The false bottom opened, revealing the oilcloth bundle. I unwrapped it. 10 gold bars, gleaming dully in the sunlight. A collective gasp went through the room. This, I said, my voice steady, was grandfather's, then father's, then mine. It's the seed money that started everything. But it's also blood money in a way. It represents a past I don't want to carry. I had already discussed my plan with them. We loaded the gold into a secure case and drove to the city. Our destination wasn't a bank. It was the headquarters of the Midwest STEM Foundation. Inside, with lawyers and foundation directors present, I signed over the entire value of the gold to establish the Robert and Susan Wilson Scholarship Fund, named for my parents, to support young women from our county pursuing science and business degrees. The ceremony was small, but a local news crew came. That evening, my face was on the TV, smiling politely as I talked about the importance of investing in the future. I didn't look like a victim or a scorned wife or a dutiful daughter-in-law. I looked like a successful woman paying it forward. I was at a charity gala a month later when a nurse I vaguely recognized approached me. She worked at the long-term care facility on the edge of town. "Ms. Wilson," she said hesitantly, "I thought you should know. Vincent Miller passed last week." Quietly in his sleep. There was no service. I nodded, a strange emptiness where I expected satisfaction. "Thank you for telling me." Later, on a trip to New York with my parents and my brother's family, we were walking through Central Park. My youngest niece, Sophia, a bright-eyed girl of 7, tugged my hand. "Aunt Clara, look." 2 elderly, shabbily dressed people were sitting on a bench, sharing a single hot dog. As we passed, their eyes, faded, milky blue, locked onto my face. Recognition, then a wash of shame and regret so profound it was almost tangible, flooded their features. It was Lily and a man I barely recognized as Vincent's brother, who had drifted into their orbit of misery. They didn't speak, just stared as if seeing a ghost from a life of plenty they'd thrown away. Sophia, her heart as pure as mine once was, ran over before I could stop her and pressed a $20 bill and her untouched bag of pastries into Lily's hand. "Here," she chirped. "Have a nice day." She skipped back to us, taking my hand. As we walked on, she looked up at me, puzzled. "Aunt Clara, why was that lady crying when she looked at you?" I squeezed her hand, looking ahead at the sun-dappled path, at my parents laughing with my brother, at the soaring skyline of a city full of possibility. The past was a shadow on a bench behind us, growing smaller with every step. "You know, sweetheart," I said, my voice soft with a hard-won peace. "Some stories don't have happy endings for everyone. But we do kindnesses anyway, not for them but for us. So our own hearts stay light." She nodded, not fully understanding, and swung our joined hands. The memory of the hospital room, of the pearls around Lily's neck, of Vincent's lying eyes, was still there. But it was no longer a prison. It was a lesson, etched in stone, that I had finally walked away from. I had built a life not on the ashes of revenge, but on the solid, fertile ground of my own worth. And ahead of me there was only light.